Iron Man is one of the most popular superheroes on the planet. This is ironic considering creator Stan Lee planned Tony Stark to be a bit unpalatable to the average reader. Never unlikable or an anti-hero, but cruder, sarcastic, and more deviant compared to his peers like the stalwart Captain America. That whole personality clash ended up being a big drive behind the famous Civil War event. One of these deviant traits was Tony's casual indulgence in alcohol. This indulgence would reach a turbulent climax in David Michelin and Bob Layton's Demon in a Bottle. This story of addiction connected with me because my name is King Rex and I'm an alcoholic. I recently spent a 30-day stint in a rehab clinic after years of functional alcoholism that became less functional over time. It was a voluntary stay, so no legal issues or anything to worry about. The story was partially adapted in Iron Man 2, but it's an abridged version at best. So I'll be reviewing this classic Iron Man tale through the lens of an addict, going over how it approaches the subject, and giving you some of my own personal experiences with addiction. Before that, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out, and let's begin. Our story begins in issue number 120, with Tony Stark gazing out an airplane window. We get a glimpse into Tony's mind through narration. The plane is compared to the Iron Man suit, a strong metal case meant to protect its users. A plane should be a warm place, but not for Tony. The stresses of his secret dual life, billionaire business mogul and superhero Iron Man, have hit a climax. Recently he discovered his supposed friend Nick Fury was buying up stock in Stark Industries, hoping to gain control of their manufacturing capabilities for the US government. This all leads to the first sign of Tony's increased reliance on alcohol. He orders a third martini and sarcastically justifies it as drinking for two. Things only get worse as a flying tank crashes into the plane's wing, forcing Tony to don the Iron Man suit and bring the plane to a stable water landing. Flying to a nearby island, Iron Man finds an occupied military base. The soldiers claim the island was used for nuclear testing and they're cleaning it up. However, they found a lone inhabitant, an old hermit named Hiram. When they tried to remove the man, they were attacked by none other than Namor, King of Atlantis. Namor hurled one of their tanks into the sky, which led to the plane crash. Iron Man goes to deal with Namor, and it's made clear the soldiers have ulterior motives. Like any good superhero crossover, the two immediately brawl. Tony remarks that he shouldn't have had that fourth martini, so that should give you an idea of how fast he was chugging those down. Hiram uses a soldier's rocket gun to blast Iron Man into the ocean. While sinking, his suit's eye and mouth plates get stuck open, and now Tony is drowning. We cut to Tony's friends, James Rhodes and Beth Cave. They find out about the plane crash and rush to the rescue. To cap off the issue, we get a glimpse of our behind-the-scenes mastermind, a man named Hammer. This story uses the events of past arcs to justify an elevated level of stress for Tony, and as any addict will tell you, stress is a major trigger. The same was true for me. The instant gratification and chemical soothing of, say, a third martini is a quick fix for those of us who still have to spend the rest of the day working, paying bills, etc., etc. The root causes of this stress are left to be dealt with later, if later ever comes. Chapter 2 opens on Tony drowning, his suit unresponsive. But thankfully, Namor saves him, a favor for all the times they fought side by side. Namor explains he originally came to the island to bury nuclear waste that was dumped in the waters. But the waste made him sick, and he was saved by Hiram. Owing a life debt, Namor has vowed to protect Hiram and his home. Rhodey and Beth arrive by helicopter, but are shot down by the soldiers. On the island, they discover the soldiers are actually a private military of the Roxxon Corporation, who want to mine the island for vibranium. Tony and Namor team up against the soldiers and make quick work of them. Sensing their defeat, they rig the island to explode. Everyone is brought to safety on a boat, but the island is destroyed with Hiram watching on. Hiram was once a rich businessman, but felt unfulfilled. He and his wife abandoned their city life to build a little home on the island. Hiram's wife passed on, and he's been there ever since. He now watches his idyllic home, the burial site of his late wife, engulfed in flames. He sheds a tear for his lost dream, destroyed by the greed of others. Hiram sets up the message that a person can be successful in society, but still have a lot of issues in their background. This parallels Tony, a rich superhero whose life is beginning its descent. For Hiram, the answer was a simpler life. For Tony, as of right now, the answer is alcohol. Chapter 3 picks up where we left off. Tony and the survivors are shipped to the mainland, while Namor returns to the sea. Tony flies off, remarking he doesn't feel comfortable around people lately. This solitude provides him the first time to relax in weeks. But his mind wanders to the past, and we get his origin story retold. Tony was making weapons in Vietnam for the American Army. He gets captured, forced to build weapons, builds the Iron Man armor, and the rest is history. This chapter is mainly a way for new readers to get attached to the character and his history, but it does touch on another aspect of addiction: isolation. In the throes of my addiction, I felt more comfortable drinking alone at night than being around people. It got to the point that on weekends, instead of spending time with my friends, I would rather just sit inside alone, drinking and eating overpriced Grubhub deliveries. Even in a moment of relaxation, Tony's mind drifts to his traumatic past. An addict's mind is often chaotic. There's an inability to find peace without their DOC, or drug of choice. And the more you indulge in that drug, the harder it becomes to go without it. And that's where the insidious cycle begins. In Chapter 4, Iron Man's jet boots malfunction in the air, forcing a chaotic landing. Tony runs the suit through multiple tests, but finds no flaws. Narration remarks that Tony's stress is leading to open anger. He's wearing it on his sleeve. At his office, Tony finds Beth Cabe waiting for him. By the way, Beth doesn't know Tony is Iron Man. Beth is friends with Tony, but has some criticisms of Iron Man. As a friend of Tony and a bodyguard herself, she's worried about Iron Man doing a poor job of guarding Tony. But Tony brushes it off and invites Beth to dinner, which she agrees to. Tony has a drink. Their date at an Atlantic City casino goes well. The two clearly have chemistry, but when Tony suggests a second bottle of bubbly, Beth gently suggests Tony find another way to unwind. He chooses gambling. Then a trio of villains arrive to rob the casino: Blizzard, Melter, and Whiplash. Iron Man engages. The chapter ends with the villains mentioning their boss wants Iron Man unharmed. This chapter shows that it's not only negative emotions that drive a person to drink, but positive ones. Tony is having a great time with Beth, but still wants more liquor. Sometimes when life is going super well, your brain tricks you into thinking, hey, you know what would make this even better? That favorite drink of yours. As a functioning alcoholic, I never had a problem getting things done, like going to work, doing my chores, working on creative pursuits. And at the end of a particularly busy day, I would say, you know what, I deserve a drink. I should have this drink. I'm owed it. This is despite me knowing that drinking was bad for my health, it would just lead to me drinking until I pass out, and genuinely ignoring everyone else in the world. It always starts out fun. I've had some amazing times in my life getting plastered with buddies. But then I'd want it more and more, and even then I was still having fun. I even enjoyed drinking alone. I loved the delirium, and that was a fact. We also see that without liquor, Tony is becoming more irritable, prone to anger. He's maintaining it now, but the pressure is mounting. And when Tony can't have his alcohol, he turns to another common addiction: gambling. This is often the story with people who jump from drug to drug. They might think, oh, well, I only get really messed up on rum, so I'll just stick to beer. Or beer is the thing that gets me into trouble, so instead I'll switch to vodka. And if I'm too messed up on vodka, maybe I'll add a little cocaine or something just to level me out. It's an obnoxious balancing act that is genuinely more trouble than it's worth, but in the throes of addiction, you don't see it that way. Right now, Tony is in a sort of sweet spot, indulging more but not noticing the side effects. It's still fun and casual, a familiar blissful ignorance, but this moment never lasts long. Chapter 5 continues Iron Man's fight against the villains. With Cabe's help, they take down the trio, with Tony admitting to himself he may have had too much champagne. Back at his office, Tony meets a Mr. Pithen, who informs him the ambassador of Carnelia wants Iron Man to represent Stark Industries at the upcoming UN meeting. Carnelia has been closed off to American business, but the ambassador is an Iron Man fanboy who wants to work with Tony Stark. Tony agrees and offers Pithens a drink, who reminds him that it's 9:30 a.m. But of course, time is no factor for an addict. Once Pithen leaves, Tony checks on his share ownership in the company. He's relieved to find that the person keeping his 51% control intact is an unnamed friend. Tony gets to work on designing new tech, all the while drinking endless brandy-laced coffees. But he finds himself too stressed and blows off steam by doing heroics as Iron Man. We cut to our mastermind Hammer, who plans to use the UN meeting to bring Carnelia in line. At the UN, Iron Man meets the Carnelian ambassador, and who happens to be the guard for the ambassador? None other than Beth Cabe. During a paparazzi photo shoot, Iron Man's suit malfunctions and lasers the ambassador to death. Iron Man is now a murderer. In this chapter, we see that Tony's drinking is starting earlier in the day. He even seems annoyed that Pithens rebuked his drink. He's drinking on the job and then complains that he can't concentrate. But caffeine and liquor aren't really known for helping out with concentration. Of course, an addict never sees it that way. While I never drank on the job, I did find myself doing chores and creative activities with a drink in my hand. It made the process more enjoyable, calmer, smoother. But eventually I'd get too drunk to really concentrate, but by then I was too zooted to really care. The most insidious thing about addiction is how smoothly it creeps up on you. It starts with a few drinks here and there to relieve stress or pain. Then you start needing it more and more, and anything that gets in the way of that sweet release is an annoyance. Work and chores become neglected, and then that adds to the amount of stress of things that you need to do each day. This leads to wanting more alcohol and becomes a destructive feedback loop that any addict is familiar with. While we haven't seen this loop get bad yet for Tony, it almost always does. In Chapter 6, Iron Man is now wanted for murder. But being a world-saving superhero, the police are reluctant to arrest him. They settle on allowing Iron Man to work to prove his innocence, but he must impound his armor. Beth objects, believing Iron Man is the killer. Reminder that Beth likes Tony, but not Iron Man. Beth meets with Tony at his office and gives him an earful about how irresponsible his bodyguard Iron Man is. With a drink in his hand, Tony snaps at Beth, blaming her for failing to guard the ambassador in the first place. There's a heavy pause. Tony instantly regrets his outburst, but can't bring himself to apologize. Beth leaves. The next morning, Tony arrives at the office clearly hungover, unshaven and disheveled. His secretary immediately knows something is wrong, but he ignores her. Tony isolates in the office and immediately goes for a drink. He blames Iron Man for all the problems in his life, saying that he even might hate his alter ego. With Iron Man temporarily shelved, Captain America takes over leadership of the Avengers. Realizing he'll be without his suit, Tony asks America to teach him hand-to-hand combat. Cue training montage. Tony begins investigating Hammer, the name he heard from the supervillains. He visits Scott Lang, Ant-Man. Using his shrinking powers, Scott infiltrates Riker's prison to interrogate Whiplash, who reveals Hammer is currently in Monaco. Rhodey and Tony helicopter into the country. Once they ask about Hammer, they're attacked by goons. A car chase ensues, and we get a cliffhanger ending. Tony's anger is boiling over. He's not acting like himself. He's taking his anger out on his friends. After this shameful act, he turns to his liquid lover, which only makes his mood even worse when he wakes up disheveled with a hangover, and then that drives him to want to drink more. The feedback loop continues. But instead of blaming the liquor, Tony directs his anger towards Iron Man, his alter ego. While the suit's malfunctions did cause these problems, Tony is displacing his anger onto the suit, treating it as if it's a separate entity. But Tony Stark is Iron Man. He's really just hurting himself through denial. There came a point in my life when I was using alcohol like medicine. I convinced myself I needed this alcohol to combat the daily mental issues and stresses in my life. But the alcohol didn't fix any of these issues, it just delayed them and put me into a state of delirium. The price of that distraction was hangovers, brain fogs, stomach aches, etc. And being a stubborn alcoholic, I chalked all this up to Momentary sickness, or not getting to bed early enough, or something I ate. I would even blame other people for getting in my way and causing stresses that drove me to drink. I was in denial and lacking accountability, and that's about where Tony is right now. The Monaco police surround Rhodey and refuse to listen to silver-tongued Americans and their legendary president, Tricky Deke. Tony is captured and finally meets his nemesis, Justin Hammer. Hammer is a shadowy business leader, often hiding his deals and name within shell companies. The country of Carnelia denied him a contract in favor of Stark, so he used his competitor's bodyguard, meaning Iron Man, to kill the ambassador. 2 birds, 1 stone. Tony attacks a guard and breaks free, only to find he's trapped on a massive houseboat at sea. With nowhere to run and his spare Iron Man suit in Hammer's hands, Tony is captured again. Immediately, he starts rummaging through the cabinets for liquor. Even the guard says Tony has been drinking too much. Tony lures the guard into the room, carpet soaked with water, crashes a lamp to electrocute the guard, and escapes. Tony fights some goons and retrieves his spare armor. That's when Hammer reveals he's been financing multiple supervillains, and a horde of them is on the boat. They attack Iron Man. This chapter shows that even when kidnapped, Tony is fixated on liquor. When even the ops goons know that you're a drunk, you're definitely messing up. Chapter 8 drops us right into Iron Man's one-man fight against the villain army. Luckily, they're uncoordinated with each other, and their limited space makes it hard to use their abilities. Rhodey arrives with the Monaco police. Hammer escapes on a smaller boat, but the villains are arrested. They confess to Hammer's plot, clearing Iron Man of murder. Despite this, Iron Man receives a frightened response from a child, the image of him killing the ambassador still seared in her mind. Tony goes to a club to drown his sorrows when Beth calls. She sets up a meeting, but Tony is already wasted, slurring his words. He writes down the wrong address, and so the next day he waits at the wrong place and thinks he was stood up. Frustrated, Tony again turns to alcohol. His butler Jarvis interrupts, concerned about how much he's been drinking. Tony furiously snaps at Jarvis in a way he's never done before. Tony wakes up with an irritating hangover. He finds Jarvis packing his bags, resigning from his role. Tony is left alone, forced to face that Iron Man was not the problem in his life. He is the problem. Our final panel shows Tony's distorted image captured in a bottle of liquor in the foreground. A truly masterful image. This is a familiar low point. The addiction is getting out of control. Everyone around you is noticing, and you either brush them off or angrily lash out at them. This pushes them away further. I used to think I was helping my loved ones by keeping them away from my addiction, isolating myself to use my medicine. Problem is, you're never as good at hiding your problems as you think you are. And so when people would reach out to me to help, and I would push them away in favor of drinking, I was giving them the message that I preferred the drink over them. Inevitably, people would stop trying to help and just leave you alone with the drug. It took me far too long to learn that lesson. Addiction is a lot like a toxic lover. It wants you all for itself, isolates you, villainizes all the people around you, until you're fully isolated and have nothing left but the drug. Now, we aren't at rock bottom yet, but the scary thing about rock bottom is there's always another bottom. Our final chapter gives us the iconic cover, showing a distraught Tony horrified by his own reflection. A bottle of liquor sits nearby. Truly one of the best covers of all time. We see Tony miserable and alone. He's coming to realize that he was using Iron Man as a scapegoat, blaming his alter ego for his stresses driving him to liquor. He's troubled and scared of himself. And yet, he drinks again. And he gets the brilliant idea that he should give up on being Tony Stark and be Iron Man full time. He flies out to save the day, but forgets to open his window and crashes right through it. Sometimes drunks are funny. It just happens. Iron Man spots a derailed train and attempts to lift the tanker, but he forgot to factor in the unbalanced weight, so it snaps off in his hands and crashes to the ground. This causes a dangerous chlorine leak. Iron Man returns to his office in shame, ready to pour himself another drink, until Beth stops him. Beth reveals she was once married to a man named Alex. Alex was a good man, but a workaholic. This would lead him to abuse prescription pills. Whenever Beth tried to intervene, it would ignite an argument. Unable to take any more, Beth left him. A month later, Alex lost control of his car, likely due to the pills, and died in a crash. Beth has carried the guilt to this day, and doesn't want to see the same thing happen to Tony. She convinces Tony to get sober and helps him through the withdrawal. Through this, Tony lashes out in rage, swinging into sadness back and forth. But Beth tolerates it all, staying by his side for days until Tony has regained some control. Tony and Beth visit Jarvis to make amends. Tony apologizes, and Jarvis accepts, willing to return as Tony's butler. However, Jarvis already sold his Stark Industries shares to a loan shark to pay for his mother's medical bills. He was the last 2% keeping control of the company in Tony's hands. As Iron Man, Tony flies to the loan shark's office and just starts demolishing the place, demanding the stocks return to Jarvis. Unfortunately, a man from the government already bought the stocks. This means Nick Fury's plan has come to completion. The government now owns a majority in Stark Industries, and it's due to Tony's own mistakes. He returns to his office furious, immediately ready to pour another drink. But Beth and Jarvis stop him. They remind him of everything he has to lose with addiction: his friends, his business, Iron Man, and his own life. Tony struggles, but manages to put the bottle away. Finding strength through his friends and in himself, Tony feels prepared for the challenges to come, confident he will win. This is a great final chapter, focusing almost entirely on Tony's addiction. We see how addiction affects not just the user, but the people around the user. Many addicts I've spoken to treated their addiction as their own problem, something that they had to deal with separate from everyone else, that they were an island all themselves. But that's wrong. Except in the most extreme cases, every addict has someone around them who cares for them, and would be absolutely distraught if anything happened to them. When you're in that delirium, everything else takes a back seat. One of the most painful realizations for almost any addict is to realize that they are selfish, putting themselves and their addiction above everyone else. Even if the majority of the time I did volunteer work, helped out my friends, was a good guy, when it came time to drink, that was it. Everything else was taking a back seat, and anyone in my way was shoved aside. There's a saying that the cure to addiction is community, and that's shown as Beth helps Tony through his withdrawal. I used to think withdrawal was something that was reserved for much stronger drugs like cocaine and crack and the like. But no, alcoholism comes with its own withdrawals. Even marijuana has withdrawal symptoms. For alcohol, there's the shakes, where your body shakes uncontrollably, and the only thing that stops it is another drink. There's brain fog, memory loss, and a myriad of other health issues. Despite being legal and incredibly popular in America, alcohol is one of the most detrimental drugs you can have in your body. In extreme situations, going cold turkey off alcohol can kill a person. It's why long-term addiction is recommended to be treated with medically monitored detoxification. My first few days in rehab, I was monitored constantly by nurses and pumped full of a ton of prescription drugs like Ativan. The result was I was practically a zombie, tired all the time, my mind operating on autopilot. Each eye was operating independently, they would blink out of sync. But after the 6-day bender I put myself through, these drugs were a necessity to keep the worst outcomes at bay. It was a genuinely scary time. I like the way the story ends of Tony's fears of a government takeover becoming sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Tony will have to live with the fact that his own actions led to these problems. Tony also did the right thing by apologizing to Jarvis, but it proves that everything can't just be so easily resolved. But that's just how life is, especially for an addict. There's always more stress, and there's always another challenge, especially for a cyclical monthly superhero. Now, I do have some critiques of this portrayal of addiction. For one, the likelihood of a casual drinker becoming a full-blown alcoholic and then going through withdrawal and then coming out the other side clean within the span of maybe the month that this story takes place in is incredibly unrealistic. Addiction usually sneaks up over time, and full-blown alcoholic episodes can last for years before the person manages to get help. But this is a monthly superhero comic, so it's understandable they'd want to shorten the time frame of these events. I don't think it would make much sense to have Iron Man plastered for years trying to fight crime. Something I think that would have made Tony's addiction more realistic would be to delve into his past, his childhood. Yes, his traumatic origin story is covered, but from talking to other addicts, the signs of addiction and the troubles that lead up to it are almost always present from an early age. We could have seen Tony's relationship with his parents, his early experiences with alcohol. This could have given us a deeper look into the nature of addiction. As for Justin Hammer, I wish his identity was kept in the shadows longer. We find out early on that Hammer is sabotaging the suits. But I would have kept Hammer hidden for longer, implying Tony's increased drinking has been the cause of the malfunctions. Hammer should have also actively played on Tony's addiction. His goons knew Tony was hitting the sauce, so you'd think a shadowy mastermind like Hammer would use that to his advantage. It'd be a good way to tie those plots together. There are future stories that revisit Tony's struggles with addiction, but that'll be for another video. Maybe. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous describes addiction as an allergy, an abnormal reaction to a substance. When an addict drinks, something unique happens in their mind. A huge wave of dopamine floods throughout their body in a way that they've never experienced before. This high level of dopamine becomes a fixation for the brain, and thus that alcohol is craved. And as the alcoholic gives into these cravings, it gets harder and harder to detach. There are people who can drink heavily for years and then just quit cold turkey. That's not how it works for alcoholics. We cannot drink, period. It is a fact that must be accepted. Our bodies and minds simply operate differently. Those who don't reliably relapse, even people who have been sober for decades. Tony's journey through addiction is fairly realistic. I imagine readers in the 70s may have gotten their first experience with addiction, period, through this comic. It took a quirk of Tony's character and turned it into an essential part of him that would provide challenges that would last until the current day. Superhero comics are often criticized for being cyclical, repetitive, rehashing old plot points, and always harping on the greatest hits. But for an addict, dealing with your addiction, even relapse, is part of the cycle. To go through these problems again and again is normal. And so when future stories pull up Tony's addictions, it's not rehashing, it's realistic for an addict. As of filming this, I am 39 days sober and feeling better than ever. I am incredibly grateful for all the help I got at my rehab center and for all the people around me who have given me support. I plan to continue working on my sobriety for the rest of my life. It's just a fact that I have to accept. It's part of my medicine. Originally, I was scared of that fact, worried that this would overtake my entire life, that I would have to dedicate my entire being to treating my alcoholism and keeping my addiction at bay. But from talking with people who have been sober for decades at AA meetings, I learned that it doesn't have to be that way. You can have friends, you can have family, you can have hobbies, and still live a sober life. And the key to that is to just take it one day at a time. And that's my plan going forward. If you or a loved one is suffering from addiction of any kind, there are plenty of resources out there. The Meeting Guide app can help you find local meetings in your area, whether that's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, or more. Don't be afraid to show up, to reach out, and to just admit that you have a problem. I'm King Rex, recovering alcoholic, and I appreciate you watching. Like and subscribe for more comics content. Join the Discord for comics discussion. Brer Rabbit in the Jazz Age. Issue 2 is now available. You can reach out to me through email if you want to purchase. Thank you again, and as always, keep on reading.